Hello, this is Brother Cromer from the Math Department, and I'll be covering Lesson 4, which is dealing with probability and discrete random variables. So the first item I'll talk about is probability, the basic rules of probability, and then I'll be covering discrete random variables. But in particular, I'll be talking about how to define the mean, the variance, and the standard deviation of a discrete random variable. So first of all, I want to talk about what are some examples where you might see probability in real life. For instance, flipping a coin, heads or tails. That's an example of probability. Probability of getting a girl. Parents are trying to get a boy or a girl. Depends on genetics, but there's probabilities dealing with getting a boy or a girl. Blood type as well depends on genetics. Getting brown eyes, there is brown is the dominant gene, so that depending on the genetics from the family, there's probabilities dealing with getting brown eyes for a child. Rolling a 7 in a game of Monopoly. Okay, so if we have two dice, roll the dice, and there's certain outcomes that you can get for a 7, and then there's probabilities associated with getting a 7. Probability of getting rained on in a picnic. So say for instance, the forecast calls for 40% chance of afternoon showers. That means that there's based on forecast modeling, there's a 40% chance of getting rained on, say if you decide to go on a picnic. Winning in roulette, you can win if you can bet on a number or a color. Say for instance, if you bet on a number, there's 38 numbers on a roulette wheel, and so if you bet on one number, the chances of winning is 1 in 38. Winning $1,000,000, the chances of that is very, very small. It's at least 1 in 10 million, probably 1 in 15 million. But the odds of winning is very small, winning $1,000,000. So these last two examples, betting on a number for roulette or winning $1,000,000, are what are called rare and unusual events. And this will be more important when we deal with inferential statistics. Okay. So now the three rules of probability. The probability of any event must be greater than or equal to 0 or less than or equal to 1. And the sum of all the probabilities of all possible outcomes must equal 1. And then finally, if E represents an event and PE is the probability of that event, then the probability of that event not happening is 1 minus PE. So that's called the complement rule. Okay. So now here's the three probability rules again. So let me just go through this. I'm going to expand the slide here. And here is the three rules of probability. So example 1, here's the probability of the number of heads from two flips. So event 0 represents 0 heads, and the probability of that's 25%. 1 head is 50%, and 2 heads is 15%. So based on these rules of probability, is this a probability model? Well, I kind of fooled some of you a little bit on this. It is not a true probability model because the second rule does not apply. The sum of all probabilities does not equal 1. However, if we change this up to where the probability of getting 2 heads is 25%, then this would be a true probability model. And here's the possible outcomes. You can get heads, heads first, or heads second, or you can get 2 tails. Okay, so or no heads. So this is a true probability model because the first two rules of probability apply. All these probabilities are greater than 0 or less than 1. Okay, and then so let me just skip this to the next part here. So here, another example is the probability. Now, for instance, here we have the probability of getting a certain color in an M&M bag. So the probability of red being 10%, green 10%, blue 10%, yellow 20%, orange 30%. But we don't have brown here as a question mark. So the first question is, what's the probability of drawing a brown M&M using the rules of probability? Well, if we sum these up to make this 0.2 plus 0.3 plus these 3 0.1s, we get 0.8. So the probability of drawing a brown M&M is 0.2. What's the probability of not drawing a brown M&M? In this case, it would be 0.8. Okay. What's the probability of not drawing a yellow M&M? Well, yellow is 0.2, so the probability of not drawing a yellow would be also 0.8. Okay. And so here's another example. Number of girls with 3. What's the probability of getting girls? So for instance, here is so say for instance, getting a boy or a girl at each birth is equal, assuming that they're equal. And here's the probabilities of the number. So the probability of the number of girls being 0 is 1/8. 1 girl is 3/8. 2 girls is a question mark, and 3 girls is 1/8. So based on the rules of probability, what's the probability of getting exactly 2 girls? Well, looking at this, if we take these numbers and we sum these numbers without the question mark, we get 5/8. So then what's left over would be 3/8. So what's the probability of not getting exactly 2 girls? Not getting exactly 2 girls. So we would take the 1 minus 3/8 and we would get 5/8. And so the last question, what's the probability of getting no more than 1 girl? So no more than 1 girl. So what we could do is that we would, so 1 girl, but you can also include 0 girls, so it'd be 1/8 plus 3/8, which would be 4/8, which is also equal to 1/2. Okay, so those are the basic rules of probability. And so the next item I want to mention is dealing with the discrete random variable. Okay, getting the mean and the variance of a discrete random variable. Now this is the formula for it, where basically, so for instance, if the event is x and probability is p, and we have, here's the possibilities of the event, 0 heads, 1 heads, and 2 heads, and then the probabilities associated with those, 0.25, 0.5, and 0.25. What we can do is that we can take 0, here's an example of this, we can take 0 times 0.25 and multiply those together, plus 1 times 0.5, okay, and multiply those two together, plus 2 times 0.25, and we multiply those two together. Then we take all these multiplications together, we add them all together, and we get the answer of 1. That would be an example of how to get the mean of a discrete random variable. In order for us to get the variance, here's the formula for it, but instead of talking through this formula, let me just give you an example using this problem right here. So what we would do is that now that we have the mean, this is the formula for it, where we would take 0 heads minus the mean, which is 1, and we would square that, okay? And then we times it by the probability of that event happening, which is 0.25, plus, and then we would take 1 minus the mean, which is 1, okay? And this is the mean here, and we square that, and then we times it by 0.5, okay, which is the probability of that event happening. Plus, and then we take the event of 2 heads, which is 2, minus the mean, which is 1, and then we square that, and then we times it by 0.25, which is the probability of that event happening. And then we add up all those together, 0.2, so we add up everything here. We take the multiplication here plus the multiplication here plus the multiplication here. We add all those up, and we get a variance of 0.5, okay? Now to get the standard deviation, all we have to do, and this is basically what we learned from lesson 3, we take the variance and we take the square root of that and we get the variance, which is 0.707. Okay, so now what we're going to do is that we'll have you use Excel to compute the mean, variance, and standard deviation of a discrete random variable. And let me just go through an example of that, of how you can do that. And this is in iLearn. You can get this in iLearn. And so say for instance if you have events 0, 1, and 2, so 0 heads, 1 head, and 2 heads. And the probability of those would be, for each of those, let me just go back to this here, the probability of 0 heads is 0.25, and then the probability of 1 head, which is 0.5, or just only 1 head, and the probability of 2 heads would be 0.25. Then everything is calculated for you where you get the mean is 1, the variance is 0.5, and the standard deviation is 0.707. Okay, and that matches what we have here on this slide. So you can use this to calculate the mean, the variance, and the standard deviation of a discrete random variable. And that concludes the video for lesson 4. And if you have any questions, please talk to your instructor or to one of your TAs.